All right. All right. I'm super excited to be here tonight with you, Damon. And let's just jump right in to what you've been witnessing. I'm not in the Bay Area right now, but it is where I am from originally. Can you just tell us what has been happening in Lake Merritt and some of the waters around the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah, so over the past 2 weeks, we've had this horrendous, basically mass fish die-off due to a algal bloom that's been taking place in the San Francisco Bay. It hit hardest in Lake Merritt, but then after kind of Lake Merritt spread all over the news because there was just literally hundreds of thousands of fish just rolling up everywhere in Lake Merritt, we started to see the ramifications across the San Francisco Bay. And when I say that, I think people have a hard time conceptualizing it hitting the whole bay. So we're talking like large dead sturgeon, 7-foot fish rolling up from Sears Point in Sonoma County all the way down to Palo Alto in the South Bay. So this is affecting the entire San Francisco Bay. It's most visual in the big fish because those ones get to the float, or they get to the top, they'll float to the surface, and they'll make it to the shoreline where people can see them. But from studying Lake Merritt, I'm pretty sure that this is happening at every kind of layer of the food web. Which is really scary because that means we're still going to see ripple effects for months to come.
Right, right. Okay, that's so crazy. So, I follow you on Instagram, and I think that's where I first started to see what you were posting, and it just felt like it kind of built up. So, what was your sort of first hunch that something was wrong in Lake Merritt?
So my first hunch was I was actually leaving town to go work in Oregon, and I was looking out the window of the plane, and this is August 2nd, and I'm looking out on the waters in front of Alameda, and there's what almost looks like an oil slick because it's so dark in the water. And I was looking down, I was like, what is that? So when I landed in Oregon, I tried to look it up. Is there an oil slick? There's no oil slicks going on. Couldn't find any information about it. When I get back to the Bay Area a couple days later, I'm starting out getting news of an algal bloom. And we all of a sudden start to see it hit the East Bay. And it's just, the water goes from being that kind of, everybody that's in the bay kind of knows the bay color, that kind of green but murky look to the bay color. It just turned this kind of deep golden color, like almost like golden cream. And then we started to see it roll into Lake Merritt and then all across the bay. And so those were kind of the first indications that something was going on. Professional agencies got involved at that point. We got an identification of the organism as Heterosigma akishiwa, which is a pretty well-known algal bloom organism from across the world. It blooms all across the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and we usually know that on the heels of it comes big fish die-offs. And so when we really saw it first bloom, I think it was kind of like that first week of August. Then we didn't see any fish die-offs for about 2 weeks, and so I think a lot of us, including myself, thought, oh, we're out of the woods. And then August 26th happened, and that's when the first big die-off took place in Lake Merritt.
Got it. Okay, cool. One thing I didn't mention before is there is a live chat, but don't get distracted by that. I can check there and then field questions to you. I want you to stay focused and everything like that. Okay, so then tell me, you're super involved with iNaturalist, and I think that's how I know of you originally. Talk a little bit about citizen science, and it seems like one of the main things. So I'm going to come back around to observation in a little bit. Don't let me forget that. But it seems like one of the first things that you did after sort of this observation stage and kind of putting the pieces together is you started to really quickly start leveraging citizen science. Like, how do you think citizen science, what role should citizen science play in a situation like this?
I mean, citizen science is huge in a situation like this because if you look at the agencies involved, they don't have the manpower to get boots on the ground, basically, to see everything that's going on. And so leveraging people through iNaturalist, which is just those of you that are uninitiated, it's basically just a cell phone app. You can take a picture of any organism in the entire world, upload it to a global database where people, help you identify it. And then when you take that picture and you upload it, it takes your GPS location and a timestamp. And so now scientists can mine this and understand kind of species biogeography. So, and that's mainly people have been doing this for live things. So I feel like that's the first time I've really been involved in like looking for dead things. But when I saw what was going on at Lake Merritt, and I got the impression that, this isn't just Lake Merritt, I kind of built an iNaturalist project and then more or less just got the word out there to people that use iNaturalist. Hey, if you're in the San Francisco Bay, if you could spend some time on the shores of the bay just looking for dead fish, that might really, really help us. And I think I built the project at like 2 a.m. and by the next morning, there was already 100 observations in it from across the bay, which to me, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, okay, this is a much bigger problem than I thought it was. And then by a week later, I think we're at like 3,000 observations or something like that coming into the project. And the big thing is a lot of those are actually endangered species. So
Oh, wow.
two big ones are the sturgeon. We have our white sturgeon and our green sturgeon. Green sturgeon is federally protected. Observations of those dead were coming rolling in. White sturgeon it's not globally endangered, but regionally we know it's kind of in danger in our waterways. And this event definitely, if it wasn't really in trouble before, this pushed it all the way over the tipping point.
I'm just going to post this. These are all photos of dead sturgeon. And so I didn't even, I've been sort of watching some of the stuff that you've been posting and all of that, and realizing that this is a significant event. I usually live in this area, and we'll get into that in a second of how, because what I would love to be doing is being out there with my nature journal, sketching, recording information that way. Definitely, I definitely use a naturalist as well. But I didn't realize the endangered status of some of these species. But could you speak a little bit to the significance of the size of some of these fishes in these photos here?
Yeah. So sturgeons are kind of like the redwoods of our waterway. They're these old, magnificent creatures that live extremely long. So the ones you're seeing here, most of them are older than me. Most of those guys are probably pushing into their 50s. The white sturgeon is the largest fish in North America. It can live up to over years old. It can get up to 1,500 pounds. And so what you're seeing here is not just the death of some mackerel that could bounce back, or salmon that could bounce back in 1 or 2 years. We're talking a decades level deficit, and their breeding age, they can't make offspring until they're in their teens. And so by what happened recently, waterways are just never going to be the same in my lifetime, and maybe not like my kid's lifetime, right? This is a huge shift in this fishery.
Wow. Okay. This is awesome. And this is really hitting me, intellectually, but also, emotionally in the heart. And let me just put this, speaking of hitting someone emotionally, this video of the bat ray suffocating, can you explain just a little bit the biology of and the chemistry of what's happening in the water, so people can understand what's going on with the fish like this bat ray here?
Yeah. So when we talk about that algal bloom taking place, a lot of people, when they think of an algal bloom, they think there's a toxin involved. And toxins can be part of the way that organisms die during an algal bloom. But you also remember that algae is an enormous group of organisms.
Yeah.
Bare minimum, there's 30,000 species, but there's probably 1 million species that we just haven't got around to identifying all of them. This specific one, there's just a hint that there might be a toxin involved, but if there is, it's not very strong. So the main way that it's killing things is that there becomes so many of them growing in the water that at night, when these organisms are usually doing photosynthesis, flip over and are just doing cellular respiration, they gobble up all of the oxygen in the water, which creates a giant decrease in dissolved oxygen. And just like you or me, all those organisms in the water, for the most part, need oxygen to live. And so they're literally suffocating to death. And so around Lake Merritt that first day, the hard part was there were a lot of dead fish already on the beach on that Sunday morning. But then as I walked around, these larger organisms had swam over to places where oxygen was better, but still extremely stressful and low. And you could see them literally gasping, trying to get oxygen. So that bat ray you just saw is one that is normally out of sight. It is at the surface, just trying to pump air with a little bit of water through the gills to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
It was tragic. You would see just thousands of these yellowfin gobies, these little small fish, just completely vertical, right at the surface of the water, just gasping for air. And then you would just see them one by one just kind of fall off and float as they suffocated. It was just, Lake Merritt was, it was horrible, especially somebody that's studied that space for about 20 years and just become enchanted by the amazing diversity of organisms there are in Lake Merritt. To see basically cyclic die-offs over multiple days as O2 just continue to drop it's been super hard.
Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, you know, you're someone who has that connection over 20 years of observing this space. You know, what about for the average citizen? Like, how does this connect or impact the average citizen in these sort of coastal areas of the San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah. So what we're going to see is, and this is something that we're just getting the tip of this, is that because we have this major die-off in all of these taxonomic groups, think about this as a complete destruction of portions of the food web. We're going to start to see the charismatic fauna now start to starve or move on because they can't find food. So we're already seeing this at Lake Merritt. If you go to Lake Merritt right now, Lake Merritt is known for being a place to go see birds.
Yeah.
No one's there, or very few are there. There's none of the shorebirds are there. There's no fish. Seagulls are there for a while. Even the seagulls have kind of pushed on. Cormorants are usually there in the hundreds almost. I think I've only seen 3 in the last couple of days. I mean, it's pretty bad. And then talking to people in Alameda as well, they're saying they're not seeing the pelicans as normal. So all of these birds are going someplace to try to find food that isn't the Bay Area. And the scary thought is we're right before the winter birds start coming in to Lake Merritt. And
yeah, exactly. It's migration. It's already migration season for shorebirds. A lot of people in the nature journaling come into this from birding. So I think you going towards the charismatic birds there, I think you're hitting people a little bit. But let's just go maybe peel off one more layer of the onion. And like for people who aren't nature nerds, aren't birders, how can this connect to them? Is there some way we can you somehow connect this to people in another way, why people should care or how this is significant, or just for people who aren't like us or aren't necessarily on iNaturalist all the time looking at stuff like that?
So if you think about any ecosystem, right, there's a flow of nutrients. And if you look at the San Francisco Bay region, the San Francisco Bay plays an amazingly large portion of how nutrients get cycled, right? Because you have a lot of organisms that make food from the water and then bring it to the land. I mean, a lot of those are birds, but there's also a lot of terrestrial mammals that are doing this. There's things way up the Delta system, out towards Sacramento that's getting benefit. But all of a sudden, we've broken that chain of nutrient cycling. And so we're going to see ramifications. First, charismatic birds, large things like pinnipeds, so your seals, your sea lions.
Yeah.
Will eventually have ramifications, probably even on the plants, because those organisms, right, poop, they pee, and that ultimately gets out there to our landscapes around the San Francisco Bay. And so we're going to have a break in the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle that, will have ramifications on just about every level of the ecosystem.
Got it. Okay. All right. Awesome. So how can citizen science help in a situation like this?
So, I mean, one thing that citizen science can really do is make observations that agencies can then use to make decisions about how to keep ourselves out of this danger in the future. So in the original fish die-off, I mean, tons of people joined iNaturalist and just started going out there and taking photographs of dead fish. CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, they usually have like more or less a Google form they want you to fill out anytime you see a dead fish.
Yeah.
And they pretty quickly rolled on that and said, you know what, just go ahead and just use iNaturalist, because there's just so much data in there so quickly. They're just like, let's just roll with the momentum. And the beauty about iNaturalist is when you add data sometimes with an agency, like you can't see it, right? You don't know what's happening to it. With iNaturalist, like you could go on there in real time and see, oh, somebody just uploaded this fish, that fish. You know what? I'm going to go over here where nobody's looked yet. I'm going to be the person that checks that out. And so it allows the coordination of kind of crisis monitoring to happen a lot faster. And then beyond the fish die-off, I think when we come now to like the birds and some of these other organisms, it's going to be even more important because I think they're going to be harder to find in a way. It's not going to be this mass couple of days of a bunch of fish rolling up to beaches. We're going to see birds acting differently. We might see dead birds. I've already seen a couple of dead cormorants I think might be related. So those observations are going to be really key to helping these agencies kind of keep their momentum at changing some of the bay situations that led to this algal bloom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. What do you think is, it seems like iNaturalist citizen science has been around since before iNaturalist, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like iNaturalist, go ahead.
Context real quick. So science up to 200 years ago was all citizen science. If you look at like Descartes, Darwin, all these guys, they did not live in institutions. And so it's actually a new thing that we think about science as being only this institutional endeavor. Most of our foundational sciences, at least in the West, were all kind of citizen science by folks that had extra time and resources and curiosity. And so I think what we're seeing is just kind of the rebirth of like, oh, yeah, we all are involved in this process.
Thanks for that. Thanks for putting that perspective on it. It seems like in some ways, as you've mentioned, iNaturalist is sort of solving a problem or potentiating citizen science and solving some potential obstacles to the communication piece and sort of organization of the information piece. What do you think is the biggest obstacle or sort of biggest limitation of some citizen science?
It's probably taking it to the next step, right? Which where the agencies get involved, where they take that data now and actually either make policy with it, right? Or take that data and then do deeper analysis and research with it. Because a lot of times as a citizen scientist, you know, maybe you've got 2 hours a day to donate to this thing that you like doing, but you don't have 8 hours to sit down and grind data.
Right.
Somebody else, you know, in an institution now can take a whole bunch of citizen science data, right, pull it together and be the person that does that kind of deeper work with it. But we'll see that shift over time as tools for doing data analysis and even just different ways to observe the world become easier. So one of the ones that's been happening the last couple of years is the use of like DNA sequencing by citizen science. So DNA sequencing used to always be this thing that was like out there, nobody could touch it except for big institutions. But now the prices dropped so much that we're seeing it revolutionize a lot of taxonomy because institutions are able to use it more, but also folks like myself can do it in their home now.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm gonna have to interview you another time to be able to talk about genetics and some of that. I've had the luck of seeing some you know, basic setups here in Ecuador in field stations.
Oh yeah.
Super remote field stations with some sequencing laboratories set up, which is amazing. But I don't want to get distracted on that tangent. Let's come back into this the citizen science piece and the role that iNaturalist plays, and try to tie it into nature journaling. So the thing that happened for me is I've been tinkering with iNaturalist probably for like 4 years. You know, when the California Center for Natural History was doing sort of the California Center for Natural History. When they were a little bit more active, like before COVID, I was like, you know, oh, cool. iNaturalist's been using it for like 4 or 5 years or so, and trying to think about ways to connect it with nature journaling. And watching your posts on Instagram, and then watching the Nature Journal Club Facebook page, where this is also being broadcast live too, I had this weird sort of feeling that like on our Nature Journal Club Facebook page, you know, as much as I love that community, I love our nature journaling international community, but like everybody, I didn't see anything about this die-off event. And we talk in nature journaling about how nature journaling, you know, helps us observe things better. It helps us form a deeper connection to the place where we are, and that sustained attention over time is a form of love. And that, you know, when you draw something and when you sit with it and watch it for long enough, sort of in the way that you've connected with Lake Merritt, you can't watch these things happen and not do anything about it. So I kind of had this weird like depression that came over me, because maybe it's the Facebook algorithm, maybe there are some people, but like there are more nature journalers in the San Francisco Bay Area than anywhere in the world. And I'm not there right now. So I guess I have some like a get out of jail. I have like an excuse basically. But like to not see more, you know, pages of watercolors showing those dead fish. Like, let me show this one, you know, like this, we do these landscape paintings that we call landscape itos. It's like a miniature landscape painting. And like, you know, this is the kind of scene, the juxtaposition of all of these dead fish floating on the surface with, you know, people going on their walks, and the buildings, you know, of the East Bay. It's like, this is the kind of thing that I feel like this is where nature journaling can step in. So I don't know if you could maybe any words of encouragement of like, or ways from what you might know about nature journaling as sort of like a combination of art and citizen science. Like how can people, regular citizens who are like, interested in nature and interested in watercolor, they might not consider themselves like activists or anything like that, but like, how can regular people like that, maybe through something that they do as a hobby, contribute to protecting and preserving some of the natural spaces that we depend upon?
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of two obvious routes in my head about it. The first one is just even just taking some of the images that have been photographed by other folks and transforming those into things that can be digested easier by other people.
Yeah.
I mean, even for me, because I love Lake Barrett so much, it was hard for me to actually pull up and just take that photograph that you just showed, right? Because that just it hurts on all kinds of levels. And I realize that that's probably why you don't see a lot of journaling taking place upon this, because people are kind of hurting. And usually when you're hurting, you're not usually wanting to share sometimes, right? It kind of causes it to close up. So I think even just taking some of the imagery that's out there from this event and journaling about it in a way that other people can digest it would be very helpful. And then the second piece, and this is kind of a grander thing with kind of iNaturalist combined with journaling, is I feel like both of them do a very similar thing, at least for me. They give me intention when I go out to see stuff, and it makes me more sensitive to what's going on out there. I think the only reason I was probably the first person to say, hey, something's going on at Lake Merritt, here's the imagery behind it, is because as soon as I got there, I felt something was wrong, because I've been to that place so many times with intent to see organisms that when something's not right. And so that going out in the world with intent is the same thing we do in journaling, and it's the same thing that iNaturalist causes for me to do, because I go out thinking, I want to see at least X number of organisms today, and I'd like to find something new, and I would like to document them. And I feel like journaling does that same thing, and it makes us more sensitive to the world. And so those two are together, but then once we find that there's a big deviation in our world, we then have to tell people with it. And I feel that both of us, or both ways, do that very well. One is much more dynamic. I feel like journaling is much more dynamic, and iNaturalist is much more like a data point. And so I think there's some real hand in hand there of how people can kind of be involved in using journaling to deal with the ramifications of this massive event. I mean, I think this is like a couple centuries size event. I think I don't think I've ever talked to people in that term before, but even if you just look at the Sturgeon, you're talking like a centuries year sort of event.
Wow. Yeah, that's so crazy. And I think that's exactly in my imagination of what nature journaling can do. That's exactly the kind of thing that, I think nature journaling should be documenting, because, worst case scenario, like I really wish that there was more careful observations written down in words and in sketches of the dodo of Mauritius, for example. Like the record that we have of that organism is so poor. And at the very least, something, like the size of these sturgeons that, like you said, are probably not going to recover in like a generation or more. At least having some record of that, and like you said, being able to communicate through those images in a way that might affect people, I think is really true. So I have this sort of question about, like you've mentioned the observation and improved observation and the information collection potential of iNaturalist, for example. Like, of these four things, where do you think is the weak spot? Like the observation, the information, the communication, or the action?
Probably for iNat data, probably the community. Well, I mean, the communication to the broader public, because like not everybody's on iNaturalist, right? It's a very not small, it's like 1 million users, but it's a small community to some degree, right? And I think that's because it's not a storytelling play. And that's really what
this link here while you're speaking.
Yeah, and that's really what events like this need. We need that storytelling, right? So we need the words, we need the visual creation of images that then keep this idea, this problem that we have to face over the next decade plus in the San Francisco Bay, alive in people's thoughts. So that way we can continue with the political motion to hopefully resolve what we think has led to this, which is we've more or less kind of tiptoed over a nutrient level in the bay, because most of our wastewater, if you're not familiar with this, goes into the bay. So every time you flush the toilet, it goes to a facility, gets treated, and it more or less ends up in the bay. And there's ways to capture more of that so it doesn't end up in the San Francisco Bay. And that's really what needs to happen. And those are big engineering feats. And so the scary thing is we're set up to have these probably for the next 5 to 10 years, even if we just started the engineering projects today. And we know that's going to happen because you have to have all of these agencies, all of these cities, all these municipalities agree on what the step forward is. And it's hard because I think San Francisco Chronicle put a number on it. We're talking $14 billion worth of engineering that's got to be done. And nobody just jumps to the table and says, oh, let me do that. And so having the stories that motivate the public to keep that pressure going is going to be really important.
Right. So it seems like, nature journaling can play a role in, sharpening observation skills and then also on a communication side. And I've always, been a proponent, or when I've tried to distill what nature journaling does, I've seen it as, a learning tool, but also a communication tool. So it seems like both of those aspects are going to be really important. So let's move forward a little bit here. And the word that I like to think about a lot when it comes to the nature journaling education that I do is the concept of empowerment. What do you think? It seems like iNaturalist is a very empowering tool. What else can we do to empower the citizen science potential of, I think the Bay Area, of all the places in the world where a citizen science based, kind of grassroots movement could really take hold, it seems like the perfect place. So is there anything else we can do to empower that kind of change?
It's a big portion of it still just getting the word out, right? If the tool's even there. So that's one big thing. And then having enough users that can think about the tool and say, how am I using it? How could I use this to tackle other problems or other questions that I might have or other people might have? Because I realize we're talking about this in a crisis mode, but usually we do not use iNaturalist in a crisis mode. I think this might be the first time it's really been used for crisis. It's usually used in really wonderful, joyful ways, which is, hey, we thought, an organism went extinct, and all of a sudden some random guy in New Mexico took a picture of this beautiful beetle, and it's the first time it's been seen in 40 years, stuff like that. And so I think we also remember that the majority of iNaturalist is really joy. It's people discovering stuff, sharing stuff, and then also realizing how the world is changing around them too. Because iNaturalist really does, I feel like, shine a light on how climate change is changing, especially species biogeography maps, organisms changing where they live because they can't live where they used to, etc.
Got it. Yeah, when I think of iNaturalist, usually I don't think of taking pictures of dead sturgeon. I usually think of mothing, which you just got back from a trip doing. I got to do some here in Ecuador. And I had I had a backlog of photos because I didn't have internet connection. So I'm sure you can relate to the experience of being on iNaturalist and just going through and uploading all of this old photos and trying to get caught up. And then you're seeing new stuff. So I can definitely relate to it. And I'm going to have to do some more episodes on combining nature journaling and iNaturalist in creative ways. But let's start wrapping up here. I want to keep this like one of those fancy meals where when it's over, you still are hungry for more. So this is sort of a little bit of a creative question and kind of trying to leave with a little bit of the positive spin on it. I know I have trouble sometimes leaving with the positive spin, but if this were, I don't know what kind of children's books you were exposed to as a kid, but if this story could be a children's book, the motivational or inspirational, maybe even the sort of post-apocalyptic, but still everything is green on the how would this end in an inspirational children's book if it were an inspirational children's book story?
That's a great question. I think the way that it would end would be, we solve the problem, but then people's rediscovery of the organisms around them would go beyond that, and we'd end up celebrating all of these organisms that live around us in a way that hasn't been done. And I feel like that's
getting on more
a little bit with these people that have for the first time realized what a sturgeon is. wow, I want to make sure that's here forever. How do we do that? You know, and I think that's the fairy tale ending, is people learning to love even more the organisms that we have here and wanting to figure out how to make an environment where we both get to be here.
Yeah, I love that, Damon. That's a great answer. And then I guess my very last question is, which character would you be in that? Which character? We haven't been, I often make these conversations really focused on the individual, and I'm like, and I'm sure you're okay with that. We like really focus on the nugget of this issue, and I'm sure I'll be able to share your links to your work and stuff later. But like, so far we haven't talked about your role in this. So like, is this like Dr. Seuss and the Lorax, like, or what character are you in this children's story?
I think it's actually funny. Like somebody actually on Instagram was like, "You're the Lorax." Where is that coming from? So I might just take that as the easy out there, because like I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody that really loves this place and want to see it continue forward. And I happen to know a handful of tools that make it easier for everybody to kind of see, get focused, and organize and communicate. And so I guess that's the character I am in all of this action. Just because you guys are so focused on visuals, what I want to do is, just because I love Lake Merritt so much, in the chat with you, Marley, what I'm going to drop is just it's
Yes.
an album of the beautiful invertebrates of Lake Merritt. So these are all the small things that nobody ever sees, never thinks about. Nobody's thinking about it in the die-off except for me. And this is the beauty that's out there in Lake Merritt, in the bay, that nobody even gets to talk about. But we should all be talking about it, because if we all saw this and thought about these wonderful things, we'd all be thinking about what can we do to make sure that they and us get to be here together.
Awesome. Okay, so I posted that into the YouTube live chat, and I'll make sure that I go back and post it so that it's a live link on the Facebook, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, and the YouTube comments. Damon, thank you so much for making the time, and let's definitely nerd out on some nature some point in the future and talk about other ways nature journaling and iNaturalist and citizen science can all join forces.
That'd be wonderful, Marley. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for making the time. All right. Thanks everyone for joining in on the live, and everyone watching this as a recorded version later. Bye.